Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tom Sorrentino. I'm a general surgery resident at UCSF, and today I'm going to tell you about Diatiro and our vision to address the organ shortage, improve transplant outcomes, and usher kidney transplant into the minimally invasive era. So transplant has a supply and demand problem. There's too much demand and not nearly enough supply. There are over 100,000 patients on the wait list in the US alone, and many more who could be transplanted but currently don't qualify. Survival on dialysis, as many of you know, is dismal. It's worse than most stage 4 cancers. And the field really needs a way to close this gap, and it's responded. Robotic kidney transplant has emerged as a way to expand access to the over 100,000 obese patients who currently don't qualify for open transplant due to perceived high risk because it significantly lowers wound complications and shortens length of stay. But robotic transplant has only been adopted at 4 sites in the US, often in part because it takes 2 to 3 times longer to sew in the organs, resulting in worse function for these donor kidneys. Second, pig-to-human xenotransplant has emerged as a likely solution to the supply problem. And it's now years away, not decades. Between our last presentation at the SAGES MBT and today, the world over has learned of the pioneering first transplant of a genetically modified pig organ into a living human recipient. Large clinical trials are now slated to start early next year with United Therapeutics and eGenesis scaling to meet this need. And at maturity, this should allow all 100,000 patients on the waitlist currently to receive life-saving transplants and expand access to many who currently don't qualify. But before robotics and xenotransplant can revolutionize the field, there's a fundamental problem that needs to be addressed. 1 out of 3 patients return to dialysis after their transplant. This is called delayed graft function, and in robotic surgery, that number is actually closer to 1 in 2, which is why surgeons have been turned off from robotic transplant despite its obvious advantages. And delayed graft function comes at the cost of longer hospitalization, higher rates of rejection, significant cost to the system, and organs failing years before they should. And as we dug into this, and what causes these suboptimal outcomes, we discovered that while there's a lot of focus on reducing the time between organ procurement and implantation, what we really need to be focusing on is temperature. So this is the temperature graph of a kidney from procurement to implant, and you'll notice that we spend a lot of money and do a quite good job of keeping organs cold during the transportation phase, only to stumble at the finish line, allowing the organs to warm dangerously during the short sew-in period. And surgeons try to mitigate this using an ice and gauze wrap, but it just doesn't work. Kidneys sustain major injury within minutes. And controlling for all other factors, studies of over 100,000 kidney transplants show that warming during sew-in is responsible for 35% of delayed graft function and nearly 10% of long-term graft failure. And it takes longer to sew these organs in, and every minute counts, worsening the outcome. And this is exacerbated in robotic surgery where the time is longer to sew in and the environment is just warmer. So what can we do about this? A group in Europe published a prospective matched cohort study where an ice-filled bag was used to keep the kidney cold during the sew-in. And this resulted in a 35% relative reduction in delayed graft function and a over 25% absolute reduction in acute cellular rejection. But it entirely changed the workflow. It would freeze the surface of the kidneys, and so it was never adopted. And while there have been many prior attempts by academic labs to solve this problem, there are no commercial competitors today. And so we took a little bit of a different approach. We interviewed dozens of stakeholders to understand what the must-haves and nice-to-haves were for a solution before we started building anything. And what we learned is that our competitors either stumbling on usability, creating devices that are bulky with tubing that sutures get caught in, or they simply can't keep the organs cold enough for long enough. And so we saw an opportunity to remove a major roadblock to improving kidney transplant outcomes and advancing minimally invasive transplant. And to do that, we've created the kidney pod. The kidney pod is a single-use insulative sleeve that comes out of the freezer at the recipient hospital and is placed on the kidney right before the start of the anastomosis. It uses a patented combination of a phase-change material and a high-performance insulation to keep the kidney in a 4 degrees Celsius microclimate for the entire duration of the sew-in period. And it's got some features that were requested and designed by surgeons: retraction handle, securing straps, an orientation indicator to make sure that you actually sew the kidney in the right way, as well as a temperature indicator. And in our production design, the device has small robotic handles for easy manipulation during minimally invasive cases. We have a single flexible device that fits 95% of all kidneys. And it's easy to apply and remove. It can be taken on and off in less than 20 seconds compared to the over 20 minutes that it takes current robotic ice and gauze wraps to be taken off and removed. It's beautifully thin, it's easy to use, and it's simple, and it just works. In our benchtop models, we've been able to keep pig kidneys cold for over an hour in both open and robotic simulated environments. And that's a dramatic improvement over the ice and gauze standard. So that's great. Do surgeons actually want this device? We surveyed 185 members of the American Society of Transplant Surgery to find out. And the answer simply is yes. We already have a list of 60 top transplant surgeons who are interested in using this device as soon as it's FDA cleared. And most surgeons said they wouldn't need additional data for trying the device. But the real game changer, I think, was this. 4 out of 5 surgeons said they would accept higher risk organs if they had access to the kidney pod. This means that we're saving organs, thousands, that are currently being donated and then discarded. But this was our favorite quote that I think will resonate with a lot of the surgeons in the room. I would use this in all of my transplants just to take the stress out of sewing against the clock. So what impact will the kidney pod have on the patients and the system? We published a Markov model with the Stanford Economics Department showing that the kidney pod will increase organ longevity in a subset of organs, prevent 5,000 patients a year from returning to dialysis after transplant, and expand access through use of currently unused organs and robotic transplant to thousands more, all while saving the system about $2 billion a year. And breaking that down, our modeling shows that the majority of these savings will come from taking patients off costly dialysis. It's really a win-win for both patients and the system. So far, we've achieved FDA breakthrough designation in early 2022. We've completed our pre-sub meeting with the FDA, validating that we're a traditional 510K pathway class 2 device, and we don't need any human or animal testing prior to FDA clearance. Regarding reimbursement, the kidney pod falls under a special pass-through cost from CMS specifically for organ preservation. This is separate from the DRG. It's called the organ acquisition and preservation cost. And what it means is that the kidney pod is effectively cost neutral to hospitals that use it. Now, regarding pricing, we've put together a value-based pricing model with our device priced significantly lower than any of the technologies that are used to preserve organs during transport. And actually, what we've seen is that the device is likely cost-effective up to a $12,000 price point if used for every kidney transplant, and in the highest risk transplants, it's probably cost-effective up to north of $30,000. So the current market in the US and the EU is about $300 million, but this is projected to balloon to over $3 billion as xenotransplantation matures. And while our vision starts with kidneys, it doesn't end there. We're aiming to apply our platform cooling technology to all organ transplants and cardiac procedures where they're still pouring ice into the chest during plegia, causing injury to the heart. Now, in the space of organ preservation and transport, we can see that there's been a landscape of some recent impressive raises. Paragonix and Organox both raised successful Series Bs in 2023, and Ex Vivo and Transmedics, who really lead the field, are public companies with large valuations. And we fit perfectly into the existing portfolios of many of these transplant and robotic strategics, which is why the group on the right-hand side has engaged with all of us, and we're exploring co-development with one of the leading robotic surgical companies. Now, to do all this, we've built an impressive team of surgeons, engineers, and designers to specifically address the needs of the company. We're led by Keith Hansen out of UCSF and Daria Wendell, formerly at IDEO Healthcare. And we're thankful to be backed by a vast network of key opinion leaders, experts in the transplant space, and minimally invasive robotic surgery. And along the way, we've been supported by Stanford Biodesign and Fogarty Innovation and received pre-seed investment from Stanford Medicine Catalyst and the National Kidney Foundation. And we're here today because we were voted audience favorite at the SAGES MBT. So Thus far, we've validated that our product works, we've secured our IP, and we're just about to start manufacturing with a well-known contract manufacturer. We're raising a $4 million seed round to fund pilot manufacturing and get us through FDA clearance. And after that, we'll proceed with a small first-in-human study, controlled rollout, followed by aggressive marketing to the only 80 centers that do 80% of kidney transplants in the United States. And regarding the raise, since our last presentation, we've secured a lead investor and are hoping to close our round by the early summer. But in the end, I think as surgeons, we all want our patients to walk out of that hospital after their operation healthier than when they walked in. And so that's really the reason why I'm so excited that I think we found a way to save thousands of organs, potentially thousands of lives, enable robotic surgery, and catalyze a new future of innovation in transplant surgery. And that all starts with the kidney pod. Thank you.
Well, thanks. It's a very interesting device, and as someone who does laparoscopic donor nephrectomies for our hospital's transplant program, I understand what you're talking about when you talk about the stress of having an organ which is still warm and not yet on the ice, and every second counts when you're talking about that. We heard a little bit about what the projected market size is, but I wonder if you could tell us what percentage of the market share are you expecting or are you required to get in order to be profitable for your company? And how are we going to keep from surgeons who are operating on a smaller budget and decide to use a Ziploc bag full of ice, as you showed in your presentation?
Yeah, so those are two great questions. So regarding how much of the market do we need to capture to be profitable? At the price points that we're looking at, it's really only something like 25% of the market to achieve profitability. The device can be made for, at scale, about $200 a piece. So there's a large gap between the COGS and what we project that we can sell it for. And then regarding your second question about, why doesn't a surgeon just use, a Ziploc bag of ice? Well, looking back actually at that study that was done in Europe, that's effectively what they did, but it took them much longer to sew in the device. They're constantly having to change the ice out of that bag to make it work. And so, I know all of you at some point, with perhaps the exception if you have seen a kidney transplant before, you're operating in this very, very compact space. And so if you can't develop something that is simple and easy to use and doesn't encumber your anastomosis, you're never going to use it. And so that's the reason why that ice bag never took off, and why all we use now is a piece of gauze that has a little bit of crushed ice in it that just melts in a couple of minutes. So we've really designed this device that it's 5 millimeters thick on each side. It doesn't encumber your vision, and it just facilitates the operation while actually performing the function that we expect it to.
So the future of transplantation may very well be xenotransplantation. Mm-hmm. Is this device just as good if that becomes the predominant transplant mode?
Yeah, so that's an excellent question, and we thought a lot about that and had some conversations with the people that run the two large companies that are pioneering that, and their distribution model is going to be similar to the way organs are distributed now, which is that there's going to be a handful of large, effectively pig farms, where the organs are going to be procured and then distributed across the United States. And so even in the best deceased donor cases, which is effectively what this model is going to emulate, you're still looking at delayed graft function rates of 25%. So you're never going to get down to that living donor DGF rate of 5%. And so those companies are still going to need a device like ours to prevent warming, to have the outcomes that they want in their operations. And then rejection, we're still anticipating to be an issue. In fact, in the patient that was transplanted at MGH had an episode of acute cellular rejection. And we're projecting that, based on the clinical data, this device will also help with reductions in cellular rejection rates.
Yeah, thanks. I have questions in two areas. One, just the actual technology. Mm-hmm. In one of your pictures, it looked like it was leather. but in another, it looked like it was metal. And then I'm just wondering if it is a hard casing, how do you deal with size? And that's, go ahead.
Yeah, I can start with that. So we just filed the design patents on the sort of the how the device interacts with the kidney. It's basically a flexible multi-layer insulation made of foam and phase change material, which is kind of like the stuff in your lunchbox ice pack. It's just a proprietary biocompatible version of that. It will accommodate 95% of kidneys. So, down to like large pediatric kidneys all the way up to like the biggest, most hypertensive kidneys you've seen. So it can accommodate all of those with a single device. It's got this sort of ingenious clamshell design that enables it to do that. And you can still, push on it, manipulate around the kidney. So it works, just like you would expect for a regular kidney transplant.
And size to kidney ratio doesn't affect the temperature?
No, it doesn't. So we've done thermal testing all the way from basically like the largest kidneys that you'll see to the smallest kidneys that you'll see, and it's able to maintain all of those within the temperature band that we aim for.
And you already started on my other question about your IP. You said you filed a patent, but do you have any existing patents? And just in that same realm, like how are you creating a barrier to entry and international market? What's your plan there?
Yeah, so we, as this project was actually spun out of Stanford Biodesign, we filed some initial patents on the cooling technology. In 2023, we're in the process of converting those into full patents. We have filed a PCT in all of the countries that we would want to sell this in, and then just submitted a new round of design patents, sort of protecting the function, the form of the device. So all of that is in process. We've also completed an independent freedom to operate analysis with an outside law firm, independent of UCSF and Stanford, that didn't see any issues with us moving forward with the technology.
Hey, thanks for that. And I should just have a disclosure. I am at Stanford. I don't really have a conflict, but I'm happy to bow out in terms of the judges' vote so the audience and the rest of the other people know, because Stanford is Stanford. It's fine, but I don't really have a conflict.
Thank you, Dr.
But it's fair to mention that.
What is your relationship with the company that makes the phase change material, or is that something you also have the patent on?
Yeah, so we have the patent on that, and that's proprietary to our company.
And you've demonstrated if it leaks, it's safe, it can stay, there's no...
Yeah, so it's entirely biocompatible. We obviously haven't done the full biocompatibility testing for the whole device, but we've independently tested each of the components of the device and know that they will pass all the required biocompatibility testing.
So I thought it was, I think it's a very impressive product and an impressive team. And I can appreciate the market opportunity. One of the slides that you shared suggested that from 2022 through 2024, your progress was around validating the thermal impact of the solution. And I'm wondering, what else have you done in those 2 years? And how many of the people on your team are working full-time?
Yeah. So regarding the first question, we basically went from a very rough prototype that we used to get breakthrough designation to now what is the production device. And it involved a significant redesign because the device was basically too large to fit into the operating space in the first place. Since then, we've completed formative usability studies with 10 different surgeons. They've all been extremely happy with how the device works. And so, yeah, we've gone from, the thing that you make in your garage to a production-ready technology that, we're just starting the pilot manufacturing now.
So what's going to take so long to file for your 510K?
So it's a class 2 device. So just the process of the manufacturing will take probably 3 months to build all the tooling out, make the 300-ish units that we need to go through the testing, and then just the V&V process takes 6 months minimum. So it'll be 9 to 12 months to do that. And then regarding the team, so right now we have, I would say, 3.5 full-time people, but we acknowledge the fact that our CEO is a surgical resident as well. I'm a surgical trainee. I'm returning to my residency in June. So we are in the process of a CEO search right now, and thankfully through the network that we have some excellent candidates that we're looking at. And in addition to our COO, who's also our lead designer, and a full-time engineer, we're looking at hiring at least probably 2 engineers and then maybe one other sort of a clinical and regulatory person to be full-time for the company.
One quick question. Do you already have designs? 2 questions. Do you already have designs for some of these other organs?
We have preliminary designs that we've sketched out and thought a little bit about how to accommodate the different sizes, and our patents protect some of that. But we recognize that we need to do the kidney pod first and get that right before we move on to the other.
I appreciate your focus. And one last question. How long will this keep the kidney cold?
It will keep your beer and your kidney cold on the IFU for an hour. It'll be closer to 90 minutes, and we'll probably end up extending the IFU, but our goal is to eventually get it out to 90 minutes.
That's good to know.
The outer casing is plastic, is that?
It's a foam. It's a closed cell foam.
Do you ever think about making that a reabsorbable thing so you don't even have to take it out? You just leave it in place?
Yes, but then it becomes a class 3 device. And I think everyone here knows that means we need an order of magnitude more money.
Okay.
Quick question, what would you do with $30,000?
I think the first thing that we would do with that is it would serve as wonderful bridge funding for us. We just transitioned out of Stanford Catalyst, and we're still in the process of closing our round. So that'll help us get through a couple of months of really getting the first units out the door with our contract manufacturer.
That's it. We're going to cut you off now. The Sharks have had their time with you.
Thank you so much.